Welcome everyone, and good morning for those on the West Coast. This is Dartisans, episode 8. Welcome to our Dart show. We broadcast this live on YouTube. You can ask questions via our moderator if you go to developers.google.com/live. And we're joined with lots of great special guests today. And this will be posted onto YouTube later and also on our podcast. So lots of ways to catch up with the Dart community. Before we dive into our show, we have special guests, Rikulo, who are building a UI framework in Dart, and we'll chat with some of the developers. And we also have special guests, JJ Behrens and Gilad Bracha. Hi, guys. And we'll be talking about some of the latest developments in the Dart language spec as we near the M1 milestone. But first, let's get started with some news. And as always, a big thanks to Dart Watch and Chris Bucket for collecting the weekly news from the Dart community. He does a really great job, and I'm going to share some of the highlights with you now. So we've seen a couple developments with building games with Dart. Obviously, games always push any platform in terms of performance and capabilities. And so, of course, when a new language and system like Dart comes out, everyone wants to know, how can I build those really cool games? So Jacob Dechert, and I hope I got that last name right, has updated his Castles game. This and almost all the libraries that we're going to be talking about are on GitHub, and all the show notes for all the news items here are on dartwatch.com. So Sam McCall, a Googler, has created a Dart JS interop library. This is yet another R&D project to figure out what's the right way to integrate the existing JavaScript libraries and capabilities with Dart. We're still trying to feel that out and exactly what may be the right way to do that. So it's great to see different efforts in this arena. And you can find this also on GitHub as well. Kevin Moore, one of our early adopters, who's also working on a proposed canonical layout for pub packages, has been creating QR codes in Dart. And so that's just a fun little project from his group. Bernard Pichler has been doing a really cool project called Dart Flash. And he has a blog that has been started to help ActionScript 3 developers move over to Dart, as the languages are fairly similar, and I think that the programming experiences, I think if you come from ActionScript 3, you'll find Dart really pleasurable. And so he's been working on what those libraries look like, and he also has an open source game built with Dart Flash. So his work is continuing as well. In fact, he has an experimental particle animation in Dart Flash. Adam Smith has been, he always seems to pick out the right commits at the right time. He really does a good job monitoring the changelog. He's found that mirrors are compiled into the Dart VM. Now, this is an ongoing spec and implementation effort to bring reflection type abilities to Dart, the runtimes, and the language. And so we haven't yet published much about that. Things are still in the works, but it's cool to see that the team is actively working on the mirrors and reflection capabilities. Brandon Donaldson has been doing a great job with a lot of samples about Dart language and libraries, and continues these on his website, Dart Examples. Recently, he's looked at libraries and interfaces, which is a little funny because we're going to be talking about some of the changes coming down the pipe for libraries. But Brandon's usually pretty quick at updating all this stuff, so I'm sure he'll keep everything up to date. Adam Smith, again, has put up a quick guide to building Dart on Win32. In fact, I think Adam and Kevin were also some of the guys that helped figure out how to build Dart with Xcode 4. So it's cool to see more and more ways to build Dart. Of course, you can get the binaries for Dart by downloading the Dart editor, but if you want to play with the source code and propose patches to the open source project, it's nice to know that you can build on these different platforms. Justin Fagnani has created a Dart Collab sample allowing you to edit a document concurrently. So this is the underlying basic technology that things like Google Docs uses, where multiple editors on one single document, more or less in real time, can collaborate. And it's really cool to see some of these low-level libraries appearing in Dart as well. And then this kind of brings us to our first special guest, Rikulo. Rikulo, the library for Dart development on multiple different form factors, they've released some interesting posts, including a simple snakes game. And what I like about their snakes game is that it works on touch and mouse and keyboard on multiple form factors. And so that's really, really cool. So with that, I think let's invite our first guest, the Rikulo team.
Hey, guys.
We're going to go to the Hangout now.
Yeah.
Hey, guys.
First of all, what time is it there? Unfortunately, it's very late or early, depending on how you want to look at it. It's actually 10 minutes past midnight here.
Wow.
You guys are troopers. Thanks for joining us.
Pretty sleepy.
Now, where are you guys again?
We're based out of Taipei, Taiwan.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you for staying up late. I know that Gilad was complaining about being in here early, but we're definitely global today.
Not a problem. It's our pleasure.
So you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with Tim.
Go ahead, Tim.
Sure. I'm actually the PM, the project manager for Rikulo. I was one that did the Snakes game. I've been working at Potters Court for approximately 3 years now. So I just generally manage the day-to-day runnings of Rikulo and our community around it.
And Simon.
Yeah, I'm Simon. I've been working for Potters for 2 years, and I'm basically one of the coding guy behind the Rikulo project.
Great. So why did you guys decide to use Dart instead of JavaScript when building Rikulo?
One of the major reasons is that we think the demand of the client-side programming has been changing. And for example, the client-side computing resource is getting cheaper, and the application is getting more complex. And also, for example, in mobile pattern, it has to tolerate more offline situation. So overall, we demand a more structured language to support that kind of complexity on client side. And we think Dart fit that gap pretty well.
Okay, great. So your documentation says that Rikulo uses a structured UI model. Can you tell me a little bit about that? I kind of almost got the feeling that you guys were absolutely positioning all the elements on the page. Can you tell me how it's implemented, like from a browser perspective?
Yeah, pretty much. Almost all of the components are positioned absolutely, but the traditional HTML layout is still available as a component. The reason of doing so is because CSS, although CSS layout is very powerful, it has too many types. You got display block, inline element, floating, and alignment, text alignment. And it's actually okay when you do this, when you write an application. But when it comes to component design, it will be a nightmare with all those combinations. And by making those positioning absolute, we're actually making those things homogeneous. And it's also very straightforward, so the user is easier to predict the behavior, and it will introduce much less bug.
So is this kind of strongly informed by the fact that you're trying to build apps that work mobile, or would you do this even if you weren't trying to be mobile or support mobile?
Yeah, Tim, you want to get a question?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I understand what you're saying. Basically, I think it fits into sort of our vision for native mobile and maybe the future of the web. It's generally what we would still be considering because we see Rikulo as an overall cross-platform. So for the web, we actually prefer this way of doing things. Basically, this has come about since originally our team, or the team before us, used to do Windows desktop development. And in that, they used to use a lot of absolute positioning. And then what we did is the team moved on to doing a Java framework, a Java UI framework named ZK. Now, within ZK, of course, we made a lot of uses of CSS. And of course, CSS is great for creating websites, laying out positions of your website, for such things as big magazines, creating flashy interfaces. But ZK's focus was particularly like applications for enterprise. So with an application for enterprise, you wanted a more desktop feel to that. So we found that when you use CSS, it really pushed the limits of what it's meant to do when you had layouts within layouts within layouts, when you wanted to build up your UI, and that led to fringe case bugs. So in this case, we've come back to sort of a beginning, as you will, and come back to the structured UI model that Simon's just stated, with absolute positioning and also some relative positioning aspects of it as well.
Well, I think this is a testament to the performance of modern browsers, and I think that I've seen some other approaches that just computing the position of all the elements in code, and I'm shocked at how fast that these browsers can do it. And so it's great.
It's amazing. If you think like 5-10 years ago, no one would have done this because it would have made it dog slow. But with V8, it's now possible to do all these things in JavaScript. Yeah, it's amazing.
I'd love to hear a little bit about what are some of the features of Dart that have been particularly beneficial to you as you build out this framework. What are some of the capabilities that you're really exploiting to get the job done?
Oh, like one of the best features we have in Dart is it both has class and closure, so it exposes more options to help us to decide our API design.
That's one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the classes versus closures. That's one of those things like taste great versus less filling. Remember those commercials?
Well, I think what they're saying, what I love about Dart is I get both.
Yeah, and exactly.
I get the lexical scope, I get closures, I get classes, and I get top level functions, and so I don't have to completely adopt only one of those models. Anytime it feels natural to use one of them, I can, and in Dart it works all together.
Great.
Yeah, so I think in fact it does almost like twice finally grant a chance to define your concept in Dart compared to like Java.
Yep. So anytime I talk to people doing mobile applications, I always love to ask, what percentage do you think, a lot of applications these days are a mix of native code as well as web code using like web views. And so I always ask, what percentage is native and what percentage is web, and where do you think we're going to go in the future? Like a few years, maybe 2 years from now, do you think that percentage is going to change? And what kind of percentages do you use in your own code?
Okay, at the moment, let's for example use Snake. The Snake code, I'm actually going to be changing it for more mobile focus. At the moment, like you said, yes, you can use mouse, you can use touch gestures. But one of the things that we're going to change, or going to play with, is making it so Snake can be controlled using the alignment of the phone. So you can tilt it and it will move the snake. That is going to be one of the demos that we're doing. So generally, to come back to your question and answer that, where we see it going is just enough so you can make use of the native mobile functionality, because that is really the major difference between doing everything in the web and doing everything natively is the actual functions of the phone.
That's right.
To us, that's the only limitation that you've got. So we see that mobile is going to go the way of maybe in the future being able to access these directly from the browser, maybe. In the future as well, because we sort of focus on mobile, that is one of our primary goals, but definitely we also look at web, the web, and actually Rikulo as a framework within Dart for web development and creating websites. In addition, in the far future as well, just going way off into the future, we're looking at the possibility of maybe the Dart VM actually is very powerful. So maybe in the very future, that can actually be ported to Android itself. So any application you do in Rikulo is natively running on your Android phone.
Well, both Android and Dart are open source, and I think some enterprising young fellow in the open source community might. It would be an interesting experiment to see if that could happen.
Yeah.
But I think this does bring up a good point. You mentioned the Dart VM, but we keep talking about Dart and Rikulo and mobile. I think it's important to point out that you're compiling your Dart code to JavaScript via the Dart2JS compiler that ships with the Dart SDK and editor. And this allows any Dart app to run on all the modern browsers out there. Talk a little about a minute about your experience using Dart2JS and compiling to JavaScript. How's that working for you?
With regard to the Snake game, I think if you go onto the blog for Rikulo, you can actually see that we've embedded the Snake game directly into the web browser. And personally, what I found is it's very good. I had absolutely no problems compiling to JavaScript. I'm running it in my Firefox browser, in Chrome, and etc., etc. I've also liked the fact that with our system and the structured UI that sort of Simon was talking about, it's very easy to get a nice looking interface up and running. So again, the Snake game that you see tries to mimic the old style Nokia phone game. I don't know whether you've seen that, so that's what we try and mimic. So all in all, I'd say the experience of compiling to JS and running it in the browser it's pretty much been fantastic.
Great. So another one that's kind of interesting these days is how do you guys do testing? You know, it's not always so easy to test apps in the browser. I mean, there's there's unit test libraries, but how do you do testing in terms of testing your code, but also testing the appearance and user functionality across browsers and devices?
We are still building up our testing mechanisms for Rikulo, but we are aiming for automation testing, like using Selenium, and we have lots of experience on that from our previous product ZK, and I think it's achievable to go such an approach.
Okay. And then, last of all, I was reading through your documentation, and it kind of seemed like it really had kind of an Android feel to the API. I was like, wow, this looks really, really familiar. Can you guys tell me what are the different projects that inspired Rikulo?
Sure. It actually comes back to what I said earlier. The first inspiration came from the Windows desktop development model and other desktop development models for the absolute positioning. And then we learned from that experience from ZK using CSS to position and come back to that absolute layout paradigm. In addition, we did look at Android quite a lot. A lot of our people in-house have good experience with Android and, of course, iOS. So it made sense to look at it from there, see what APIs are available. In addition, as well, because of the power of the Dart language, we're looking at sort of the API of the Dart. So this is just a good opportunity for me to say that we appreciate all contributions to Rikulo, not just code, not just documentation. By that, what I'm meaning is people just using Rikulo and then giving their thoughts on the API that we've got around Rikulo, seeing whether we can fit in more Dart features, whether we've missed something, whether someone thinks something is more elegant. So we're totally open to all those feedback.
Great.
And on that note, I think as we wrap up, what is some of your feedback to the Dart team? I always like to hear what are some of the things that you'd like us to be working on next to help Rikulo.
To be honest, our top request is definitely looking forward to the formal release of the first official version of Dart. And we think Dart is a great language and it's getting greater every day.
Great.
Awesome. That's good feedback. Well, how can people try Rikulo, and what do you want to ask everyone to do?
Personally, I'd just like to ask everybody to download it. Try the samples. If you take a look at our Google Plus page, there's information on getting started with the samples. You can also download Snake, give that one a go, and any feedback. I'm not a games developer, so there's probably some mess in there. So if you got any feedback on improving the sample, that'd be great for me to hear. And really just give Rikulo a try and just feedback to us via email or something like that. We're very open to suggestions and we're very open to contributors getting involved with us.
And what's the website again?
It is www.rikulo.org.
You want to spell that?
That is RIKULO.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome.
So we're going to next talk to Gilad, and I know he wants to show us the proposed syntax for imports, but we're going to have to cut off the Hangout right now.
And we're going to say bye and
we're
thank you.
We're going to say goodbye.
Yeah.
That's right. And then do sharing the screen.
Yep, we're going to flip over to Gilad and talking about some of the... so thanks, guys, at Rikulo.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for staying up late.
Appreciate it.
It's awesome. And with that, let's talk to our next special guest, Gilad Bracha. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Hey, Seth. Sorry, my machine logged me out.
It's okay. As everyone knows, we are gearing up for an M1 line in the sand, if you will, around the language, and that lets our implementations then buckle down and all get up to the same state and then focus on other cool things like performance and libraries, etc. But to do all that, we've got to get the M1 language comfortable. And one of the big pieces of feedback we've received from all the major hackathons we've done and mailing list feedback and bugs, etc., is developers are asking for a better way to compose their libraries together, both an easier to understand syntax, but I think just a easier to understand mental model. And so it was awesome. The team went back and huddled and came up with, I'm really impressed, some really great changes that to me at least answered some of my biggest questions. And here to explain the libraries and import, syntax and semantics, and just changes coming down, Gilad. So thanks.
Okay, I guess people can see what we have there
Do we
on the
need to
screen.
share the screen?
I don't know.
I think we need to share the screen.
We're good.
Oh, we're good.
Thank you. All right.
So this is sort of a dummy example I just typed in here a few minutes ago, but people who are already familiar with the library syntax that we have right now will notice a few changes, and some of them are just cosmetic, and there always are a lot of comments on syntax, but more substantially, really, there were some issues with the library design where we wanted to make it more robust in terms of how libraries evolve. We wanted to make it a bit easier for people to use in a few cases where they complained about issues, and so there are a number of actually meaningful semantic features that are different here. So as you can see, the hash marks are gone. You don't, let's see, actually, some of these things actually were spec'd one way, never implemented, and now they're spec'd another way, so you probably don't even realize some of the improvements that we made. But the basic idea here is still that libraries can be broken into different parts. Mm-hmm. But one of the big changes is we formalized this notion of parts because people were quite uncomfortable with this idea that you just used the source directive and sucked in some code into a library. This gave some people the willies. They were thinking of like preprocessors and stuff like that. And we didn't help this by having this hash syntax, which we thought would be familiar, but turned out to give people the wrong associations.
Had baggage.
Because it never really worked like includes and things like that.
I kept trying to type ifdef and it wasn't working. I don't understand.
Well, I'm glad at least that didn't work. But the idea here is now that you can still break your library into parts, but one of the key things was that there wasn't a real connection between the parts and the library, or at least there was only a one-way connection, right? The library mentioned what things it was sourcing in, but whatever you were sourcing in was just a file somewhere that could go anywhere. And this caused issues in terms of, okay, you go browse this source, what's the context now? Because the scope is actually influenced by the whole library-wide scope. So everything else in the library should be visible there. But how do you know that? How do your tools know that? Mm-hmm. And so, well, we decided that the parts actually have to point back at the library. Well, have is a strong word because there are cases where you don't want it. But let's. I'm going to just. Let's suppose this is a different file now. Oops, sorry. Shift, right, we just put a line in the sand here. And you're going to have, suppose this is like the ABC, and so in ABC we might say something like part of mylib. Okay, so there's basically the individual parts declare that they are part of something, so there's a connection, so they don't belong to something random. And that gives everyone, the user, the tools, the sort of information they need. Now, nothing is ever that simple because, for example, for testing, we actually rely on the fact that you can actually plug things into different libraries. And so what happens is that you can still, refer to a part from multiple libraries. And if your testing library simply has the same name, you'll be good. If for some reason your testing library has a different name, or we found some other exotic case where you really wanted to share this stuff, you'll get a warning. Dart's philosophy is generally to slap you gently rather than kick you in the gut, as the bondage and discipline school suggests. And so it'll still work, but yeah, if you can tolerate the warning, then you can do that. But we generally recommend that a part belongs to a particular library, or at most to a library and its test cousin.
So you have mylib here as the identifier, the name of the library. Does that have any relation to the file name now, or is this?
It doesn't have to be related. I mean, it might be very sensible to have a convention where it was related, but it doesn't have to be. It's an identifier. The identifier. One of the people kept asking, why is there a library name in the first place? And kept telling them, eventually you're going to want to reflect on these things, print them out. There's all kinds of reasons, but all of this was abstract since the mirror stuff wasn't there yet. One more reason now is this gives you something you can name in the parts. This is how you refer to the library from the part, and you want a name as opposed to the URI because you don't want to have to reconfigure these things every time something moves. So that's one set of important changes. The other set of important changes really have to do with imports, the stuff that's up here, imports and the hide and show operators and how we do prefixes and stuff, all of which looks rather different. A lot of people wanted a, quote, real syntax. Now, I wanted a real syntax. The original idea of the syntax was to make it look like a reflective call with the intention of building this reflective library interface that would be familiar at that point, but turns out that there's a reason people have syntax, and reflective calls are a bit harder to use. So we've gone to a more conventional syntax, which does look nicer and gets rid of the hash, which confuses the hell out of people anyway.
Aren't you worried that with this new syntactic sugar, that the syntactic sugar will lead to cancer of the semicolon?
This is not really sugar in the sense that this is simply expressing what you wanted to do. Now, I can give you lots of examples in Dart where it already is tempting people, and people need a semicolonoscopy to overcome that. But
touche.
In this case, I don't think we've gone overboard at all. We're basically we've gotten rid of noise, right? Hash, the parens, all the things that are necessary to parse a general purpose expression, but aren't necessary in the case where you actually know what we're doing here. So it's just lighter, and there's more important, right? People focus on the syntax, but more important is that semantically there are important differences here that make libraries more robust in the face of long-term software evolution, which is one of our big goals with Dart. And we're just starting this because Dart hasn't been around much. People haven't yet encountered all the troubles that have led, say, to all these complicated practices and tools in, say, the Java world, etc. Right? So the need for serious library management is only beginning to surface. But here inside the Dart team, we've already hit some of these issues, and so we're trying to make that more robust.
Can you talk a little bit more about what hide, show, and the and export syntax?
Right. Perfect. Yeah, that is exactly how we make these things more robust. So one issue is, a big issue, of course, is conflicts among your imports. And so we're trying to give you tools for namespace management. So really what you're importing isn't, strictly speaking, a library. You're importing a namespace. And it used to be that you imported the library and you got its entire namespace, and if they conflicted, well, there's a problem, which means that over time, as library A adds something, they might break their clients because somehow there's a conflict. So we've done several things to ameliorate that. One thing is that the definitions inside your library, the importer, always take precedence over anything imported. So no one can break you that way. Right? If you have a name and they have the name, your name always wins. That makes things a bit more robust. Then there's the question of what happens. Okay, so I'm importing two libraries that happen to have a conflict between them. So we've, it used to be that we complained sort of eagerly in the fail-fast tradition. We said, okay, there's a conflict here. Now we only complain, well, not now, when this is implemented. We will only complain if you're actually using a member that's ambiguous, that comes in from multiple places.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you're importing two third-party libraries and you don't want to see any warnings, that would be really irritating to see a warning that you have no control over.
Right, and even more irritating where you get a compile time error, which is actually in the state now, right? This is possible with libraries, as opposed to, for example, inheritance and stuff like that. I'm not going to get into that, but there's good reasons why sometimes you don't do it in sort of situations that seem similar. all of these things kind of help to help libraries evolve independently without breaking their clients. In addition, we have these hide and show operators that basically let you control the namespace. So maybe, in fact, I'd recommend you use these left and right, but most people are too lazy, right? One of the things people have learned in the Java world is that blanket imports are actually bad style, and you want to import individual elements. This, in a way, gives you a way to do that. So the show combinator, if you look at the third line among the imports over here, basically says, okay, I'm going to import from baz.dart, but the only things I want are the name things. So these are names of classes or top-level functions, basically top-level members of the library. And so you can actually control exactly what you want to see, which again reduces the risk of any conflict and lets you decide which one you wanted to use and things like that.
Do you think that one day, maybe in the distant future, the Dart editor will automatically manage those so that you know exactly where things are coming from?
I'm pretty sure, and I don't think it should be that distant, right? This is indeed one of the reasons, right? So wildcard imports, as in most languages, right, are motivated by that great force programmer laziness. And the only way to, it doesn't help to write style guides which say, well, you really should import each one individually so you really know exactly what your dependencies are, blah, blah. That's all good and true, but it's like dieting, people lack character. And so this is sort of a dieting machine, the IDE, which sort of says, I'll figure out what you're actually using and put these things in for you. And that's quite common, I think, now in the Java world. And, it's a small matter of programming. The Dart editor team is doing a terrific job of trying to catch up with 10, 20 years of work in other tools have behind them to give you that experience, and they've made very great strides in the past year. And I imagine that it won't be all that long. Once this construct is in there and implemented in the compiler and stable, and we know a bit how to use it, they'll probably start supporting that. So in fact, again, it's also a policy decision, but I would encourage people to say import and then show each individual thing that you're using.
Now, there's two ways, I think, to hide names. You can use the underscore, or you can use hide. What are some of the pros and cons?
There are more than two ways, and it depends what hide means, as various great men have said. So hiding via underbar is privacy. That means the language basically makes them invisible outside the library. That's sort of good from a software engineering point of that you control the fact, you as a library author control the fact that nobody can touch this stuff, right? That's library-based privacy. That's one mechanism. The mechanisms you see here are in the hands of the importer. So the person outside the library is importing, you can control the namespace that they're bringing in, and there are actually three ways to control this. So show is one of them, which says explicitly, I want this and this and that, and then all the rest isn't coming in through this particular import. Another one is hide, which says, well, you know what, I'm still have no character. I want everything except this one or two, which actually conflict, and I want to filter them out. So hide is sort of symmetric to show. And then there's as, which is the third line, which is what was currently called the prefix, right? So basically, when we say import bam.dart as bam, right, that's essentially introducing a prefix. So all the names coming in from bam.dart are going to be prefixed by bam. So you'll say bam.x and bam.y.
That also seems like a pretty safe approach.
Yeah, that's true, though it does tend to make your names more verbose. And so, I'm not sure how we're still giving people options. And the other thing that's subtle and important to note is that the namespace, the stuff that you're bringing in, you sometimes want to also expose it to your clients, right? So I think this is less of a problem, but at the stage, you guys remember this probably in more detail than I do. But we used to have Dart.dom, Dart::dom, and Dart::HTML, and they were similar, and people wanted bits of both, and they conflicted, and it was very hard to manage. And you sort of, being able to selectively control this is one thing that helps, but it also is true that you might think of creating a library that had just had the mix of things that you wanted, and bringing that in, and then exporting it out. In fact, you can It helps you build smaller libraries, right? Because you can actually have a library that has no real content in itself, but is sort of a funnel. You're piping in several components and say, well, you always want to go on HTML and SVG or whatever, right? So some combination that goes together. That doesn't mean they have to be lobbed together in this giant monster. You import them and re-export them. And that's what the and export is. And JJ and others have complained about the syntax because people always complain about syntax.
So sorry.
We have to give them something to complain about.
Yeah, whatever syntax you
misdirect them from the real problem. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. It's actually fairly we considered a number of combinations with this thing, and we sort of wanted that import declaration to flow. And it's important that that export shouldn't be in the wrong place, because you don't export the prefixes. Right, because the prefix is your own problem. You as a library want to control your internal namespace. You want to give this name, but letting that flow outward when you re-export, you'd start to getting very long qualified names and conflicts with other people just choosing the same prefix. So you don't actually want to export the prefix. So what you're exporting is a namespace that hasn't had this prefix applied to it. And so you can't necessarily put the export in front of the as, because then it feels like you're renaming, the exported namespaces includes the prefix. So it's tricky, and, I'm sure I'll be flooded with suggestions on other things, some of which we've considered, right? A lot of people suggested we'll have a separate export directive.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that it makes you repeat yourself, which is not a popular thing, because you not only repeat the name of the library or the URI or whatever, but because you may be importing this with all these high directives or whatever, then there's more stuff that you're going to have to say again. And so you really want to tie the export to the import and re-export the namespace that a given import does.
It's kind of interesting looking at that ampersand. It reminds me of when we had the pound import, and it's like, oh, why am I having strange flashbacks to C? It's like, I think I'm doing bitwise operators here.
Right, but this is actually, we could do double ampersand and it would be logical. But no, seriously, we could, introducing lots of keywords is always problematic. Are they real keywords? Are they pseudo keywords? Are they none of the above? Are they, the less words we have to introduce, the better. And on the other hand, we wanted this to flow as a phrase: import this and export it. Right. Otherwise, export just sits there and it also looks weird.
Well, we've got a couple minutes left, and we have some questions from the public. So let's take a couple of these. So Ladislav, a guy who's doing a great job participating in the mailing list, wants to know. He acknowledges that libraries are identified by arbitrary strings and soon to a qualified identifier here. But is the way of locating the libraries for import also going to change?
There's no plan for doing that. There are a lot of people who are fond of URIs. Given that we only have a few minutes, I won't give a long discourse on the history of this idea, starting with Modula and Ada and stuff like that. It could be done that way, right? You could have just mentioned the name and the environment. We'd have to integrate pub more tightly into the language, so it would go find things for you. This is largely with more retarded things than pub, but very basic tools were built into compilers that, you'd name a module that you were importing, and it would generally look in the directory where it was installed or have a path, or right. We're not doing that. This makes it easy to set up things initially it probably isn't going to change. I
think this has an echo to our web programming backgrounds, where you can just pull in by files and URIs together and quickly get started without having kind of the infrastructure that large. So I think that has some of it. Kevin asks, I think this is a nice perspective question. What was the thinking behind library-based privacy instead of object-based privacy?
Ouch.
I don't think this is very loaded. I think this is a curiosity.
No, I like object-based privacy. The thing is, object-based privacy is it's an austere discipline, right? It requires you to design. It makes certain kind of things hard. When you have multiple classes that are interoperating, you want their objects to flow out of the library and be accessed, but you don't want them to expose their API. But they between themselves have to interoperate. And it can get fairly tricky how to do that. You put some shared state hidden in the library and have them talk through that, or it gets rather messy. It is a lot easier to work with library based privacy, but it does create certain weird situations that I'm not fond of. But language design is a compromise.
There's a couple questions I think are easy to answer, but great. I think a lot of people have them. What is the status of the official Dart UI library, and how might web components factor in? This is from Kevin. This is a great question. The team's still hard at work trying to figure out how the new features of the web platform, like web components, impact and affect a Dart UI library. And so the team's hard at work on that. It's still very much part of the roadmap, but it remains to be seen exactly how they're going to play together. But I can say it's fair to assume that the Dart UI library will play well with web components as they grow and become better spec'd out and implemented across browsers. Pollux asks, are there plans for a global pub repository? If yes, will it be a repository of source files or a global map from library name to Git repositories, or both? There is a plan for hopefully many different global pub repositories. I know the Dart team will stand up their own pub.dartlang.org, which will be probably the first, but hopefully not the only package repository that the pub command works from. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. I believe the idea is it will be friendly to both source code repositories like Git, as well as tar-gz snapshots. So I think at least we'll have those two mechanisms to publish out your packages and upload metadata and find and discover and install packages. And then I think another good question from Pollock is there an easy way to obtain a Dart REPL? If not, are there any plans to provide one? This has been something that's come up numerous times.
This should have been there from day one.
Yeah.
So you like REPLs?
Well, REPLs are a first step. REPLs are actually, it's sad that we're talking about REPLs when we can actually go a good way beyond REPLs, right? And when try.dartlang.org was being put up, I sort of screamed that this should at least be a REPL, if not more, but there were technical difficulties around it or whatever. It didn't happen. I think that the tools should offer you more than a REPL, right? The ability to not only execute these things, but to then inspect their results as through an object inspector. And there are lots of cool examples of that in the Lisp and Smalltalk worlds and stuff like that. And this will happen. It annoys me more than it annoys you how slowly this is happening, but mirrors will make some of that easier. And just hold your breath and turn blue, and it'll eventually happen.
Yeah, I come from the Python and Ruby background, and so I definitely feel
really
a little bit
strange not having a REPL.
Yeah. Oh, I think we're out of time, so I want to thank our special guest, Rikulo. Thanks, guys, for staying up again. And Gilad, thank you very much for getting up early and helping explain the new library and import semantics and syntax. I think this is going to be a big boon, especially when pub and the new library stuff, we're going to see an explosion of third-party libraries. I want to encourage everyone to join us on the mailing list, the MISC at dartlang.org. That's the general discussion. And certainly encourage everyone to ask their questions on Stack Overflow. I think the tag is just the keyword Dart, and you'll find us as well as others from the community answering questions and just generally helping out and being really friendly. And I love to see the community participate. And so lots of ways. And finally, a call for feedback. Just generally, we'd love to see what you're building. We'd love to know what you think and what you use and what you'd like to see us help you to make the world's next awesome modern web app.
excellent.
So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll see you again next time on Dartisans. Take care.